So today what we're going to do is go over the offset function and how that works, as well as basic if statements and for loops. So the first thing that we're going to do is offsets. So go to Visual Basic here, and we will make a new module, and we'll just do subtest. Okay, so the way offset works is similarly to just a range module, right? If we wanted to select a range, right, A1, it would simply be range A1 dot select, right? Simple, easy. We have fade through that. A1 was selected. However, what we can do is create offsets to those ranges in order to select different cells, right? So let's say we wanted to select cell B1 that was right next to cell A1 there. What we are going to do is, oh, sorry, have my notes, pulling up my notes. So we have the range A1 selected, right? If we want to select range B1, what we can do is, since A1 is now the active cell, we can reference the active cell and say dot offset. So what this offset clause does is literally offsets what range you want based on a number of rows and a number of columns. So in this case, we want to select range B1, and actually, so A1 should be the active cell here. The offset, and we want to offset it a certain number of rows and columns. So the first argument of the offset clause is the number of rows you want it to offset. In this case, we still want row number 1, so we're going to say 0 on the rows. Now the column offset is going to be 1, right? Because we want it to be 1 over, so B1. So if we wanted A2, for example, we would instead have 1, 0, right? Because we want it to offset 1 row and 0 columns. And then we can say dot select. Right, so what that will do is, let me type through that. Oh. It does not like the fact that I am, there we go. Okay, so we have range A1 selected, and then what we should see here is range B1 get selected with our offset, which it was, right? This also works backwards, right? So if we have B1 selected, now that is the active cell. We could say active cell dot offset, and let's say we want to go back to A1. We're not going to offset any rows, but we want to go back to column A. Our column F offset would be -1. Right, so now we are selecting range A1, then selecting range B1 based on the offset, then going back to A1 based on the other offset going in the other direction, so -1. Okay, so let's go through that. A1 gets selected, B1 gets selected, A1 gets selected. Does that make sense as to how the offset works?
Yeah. So when would you use this, like an example?
Yeah, so one thing that, and the reason I changed the homework up a little bit after that is because I realized I didn't go over this method. So when we said that the like the message box last time was, what is your favorite food, right? And then how much does it cost? In that case, we had like the food, right? And it was like, I forget what it was, apples, bread, and I don't know, hot dogs. And then we had the price, right? Let's say 1, 2, 3. In that case, when you typed in a cell and you wanted to know the price of that food, you could use the dot offset method to determine what the price of that food would be, right? So in this case, we had input box, or say input equals input box. What is fine? What cell is your favorite food in? Okay, what's wrong with that?
Oh, you need the little parentheses. Parentheses.
Parentheses around what?
Around a question about
That's what I
outside of the
just did.
quotations.
Okay, well, that's not good.
Oh, that's not, yeah.
Input equals input. Here, maybe if I dim input as string. Oh, I think there's an error with the name here. I'm just going to say X. Input, I think, is a function within Excel, and that's why it didn't work. Okay. So X equals the input box. What cell is your favorite food in, right? Then the message box result would be your food costs plus, and then instead of, so what we said was, your favorite food is apples or bread or hot dogs, depending on what cell you put it in. Instead of just returning that x dot value, right? What we want to do is return the value to the right of that to determine how much that price is, right? So what we would do is say plus range x dot offset and no rows, one column dot value, right? So instead of just returning that, we want it to return the value offsetted one to the right, which is going to be the price, right? So let's run through that. Oh, whoops. That is not how you spell message box. Okay, so we did all that. Input box, what cell is your favorite food in? Let's say I like bread, A3. All right, then F8. Oh, type mismatch. I think it's because it's a number. Food costs. Range X dot offset dot value. One dot value. Okay. Oh, and that's why. Yep. So if we got a space there to make it look better, what cell is your favorite food in? A3. Your food costs 2, right? Because when you're doing a string concatenation with a variable and the string, you have to use the ampersand instead of the plus. That's my bad. So does that make sense as to when you would use an offset?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Perfect. Great. Any questions, Sylvia? Make sense?
No questions. Yep, makes sense.
Okay, perfect. So we have that. That is the offset clause. Let's go over some quick for loops. And within this for loop stuff, I'm actually going to throw in a couple of little side functions as well, just to make some of the training easier as well. So the way a for loop works is it will do something a certain number of times that you specify, right? And the syntax for a for loop is you want to do something for a variable in a range of numbers. So I just use x typically. So let's get rid of all this stuff because that'll complicate things if we have multiple x's. Okay, so for x equals 1 to 4, and then you say exit 4. This is the syntax for a for loop. So for x equals 1 to 4, and then there's going to be something in between here, and then you say exit 4. This means that this is going to do something 4 times, right? So for x equals 1 to 4, we have 1, 2, 3, 4. If we wanted to do something to this range, we could just use a for loop to do that, right? So let's say we want to make all of these cells bold, right? So for x equals 1 to 4, and actually, no, you don't put x at 4, sorry. You put next x. And so what this does is it will perform 4 times. X equals 1, it will go through and say next x, and then go back up to the top, run through, next x, go back up to the top, run through, next x, and then that's the 4th time it would run through and then finish. Does that make sense? As to how it would work? And I'll demonstrate.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So let's say for x equals 1 to 4, we want to make the cell A and X equal to, and let's say we want to make those bold, right? So what we'll do here is say range, and normally we just say range A1, A2, A3, and A4, right? But because we have our X variable, we're going to say A and X. Dot font is how you would change the font. Dot bold is how we'd make it bold, and that's going to equal true. So we're setting the bold property equal to true on these cells. So for x equals 1 to 4, range A and X, font.bold equals true. Next X, and then it would do it again 4 times as we specified here. Right, so let's run through that. For x equals 1 to 4, we should see A1 be bold, and then it's going to go to next X, A2, A3, A4. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So let's make this a little more functional, right? So right now we have it just going 4 times, but what if we had a table that was 7 rows or 10 rows? We can determine the last row, again, like we've done last time. The LR, or last row, is equal to range A1 dot end, XL down, dot row. That gives us the range A1 dot end XL down, which is this, and then it returns the row, which is 4. And then we can say, instead of 1 to 4, we can say 1 to LR, right? So let's take the bold off of these and watch it work again. So we have our LR variable established, and then it's going to run through for X to LR, and boom, right? So now if we were to add, let's say, nuggets and salad to this, and let's say nuggets cost $4 and it's a pricey salad, so it costs $5, right? We're gonna run through. It establishes the last row, and then it's gonna go through all the way to 6 now, because that's the last row. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. So that is a for loop. And next, what we will do is an if statement. So an if statement is exactly what it sounds like. It's very, very similar to what we do in SQL, right? It's just if something is something, then we want something to happen. So the way that one works is if, and just as an example, let's say 1 equals 1, then, and then we're going to end if. Right, so we have if 1 equals 1, then, and then we're going to do something, and if. So in this case, let's say if the active cell is equal to hot dogs, we want it to highlight as a certain color, right? Let's say if, get rid of these, active cell dot value equals hot dogs, then we want active cell dot interior is how you would control the interior of the cell. And we want to change the color. So dot color equals, and there's a variety of different colors that Excel has within it. There's a lot of basic ones, obviously, but also there's tons of different variations of those colors, right? So when you look in here, there's all these different colors, right? And so it's a ton of different things. However, if you just want the generic colors, typically what you can just do is say RGB and just that color. So let's say we want to highlight it yellow. I can say RGB yellow, right? And then it corrected that to a capital. So you know it recognizes that that color there. You can also do RGB blue. You can do RGB red, RGB green, etc. And then typically also like the variations of those colors work, right? So RGB light blue would also work. There's a variety of variations, but typically as long as you put RGB and then a color combination, there's some sort of color within Excel that would recognize that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So let's do yellow. So we have if the active cell value is hot dogs, then the interior color of that cell is going to be set to yellow. So let's make bread. I'm just clicking on bread here to make that the active cell. And let's run through this. And you saw the way it worked. If the active cell.value is hot dogs, then it's going to run something. But since it was not hot dogs, it completely skipped to the end if and moved forward. Right? But if we were to click on hot dogs here and suddenly that's the active cell. Nope. Sorry. Hot dogs. Okay. Then it recognized that as true, and it's going to move here, and it's going to set that to yellow and if and end the subroutine. Does that make sense on how an if statement works, but also colors?
Yes. Yep.
So let's do a different variation of this if statement here. Let's say, and let's actually combine a for loop and an if statement. That'll be fun. So for x equals 2 to LR, and we actually need to reestablish LR. So LR equals range A1 dot end Excel down dot row is our last row. So for x equals 2 to LR, so we're going to start this on row 2, and it's going to go to the last row. And then we have our next x, right? If range B and LR dot value is less than 3, then we want range B, B and LR dot color, or sorry, dot interior dot color equals RGB green. What this is going to do is for x equals 2 to LR, so starting in row 2 and going to the last row, if the range B and the last row, so as it goes down, it's going to check range B, is less than 3, it's going to make that green. What we're also going to do is what if we want it to do something if it returns false, right? So the way we're going to do that is with else range B and LR dot interior dot color equals RGB red. Oh, whoops, that should not be a space. Okay, so what this is now saying is if the value of column B here is less than 3, it should light up green. If it's not, it should light up red, right? Because we're saying if range B and LR dot value is less than 3, then this, else run this. And then because it's an if statement, we're going to end the if. That makes sense?
Yep.
Yep.
Perfect. So let's run through it. So we have our LR established, and then our for loop just began. It is not less than 3, so it's skipped. Oh, wait, whoops. Why did it stop? Hold up. If range B and LR. Sorry about that. Stop there. Range B. Oh, sorry. I'm using LR through this. We should be using X. That is my bad. Right, because we want it to go to the last row, but we want it to operate on the different cell each time with the loop. So we want it to use X, which we've set for X equals 2 to LR. Does that make sense? Sorry about that. Okay, so let's run through it. The LR is established for X equals 2 to LR, and then we're going to go through. The first one is less than 3, so it returns to this one, and it makes it green. Next X, also less than 3, makes it green. Next X. Oh, it is not less than 3. It goes to the else, makes it red. Next X. Same thing with these last two. And sub. Does that make sense?
Really cool.
Yep.
Awesome. Okay, so covered quite a bit. We did the offset. We did the example there with the message boxes and the input boxes like last time. Just followed through with that on the offset, and then basic for loops and if statements, as well as some basic fonts and colors. Any questions?
No questions.
Perfect.
Cool.